gender issues, but they also deal.
Yeah.
They also
Go.
deal with men, women, and other gender.
Okay. Good.
And yeah.
Good. Yeah, gender
Yeah,
equality is all gender because it's not necessarily woman, though woman occupies the predominant focus because we are all know only binaries, men and women, but gender equality talks about all gender, not only women and men. It still has to go. Still has to grow in terms of our own attention on other gender, lesbian, bisexual, transgender.
Yeah, but one thing I also remember he discussed was when he was at a certain workstation, where you find that it's a very patriarchal society, and the men dictate what happens, even with the patient they treat. If it's a woman, the man will dictate the kind of treatment his wife gets or the kind of treatment the child gets. And if the doctors or nurses cannot go with what he wants, with what the man wants, then they even discharge the patients from hospital on their own. And they tell you, you cannot tell us anything. They decide everything by themselves. Yeah.
Thank you, Helena. So let's start. I'm very impressed by the WhatsApp messages that are going around. I like the active exchange of ideas. I think that's what it serves. Thank you very much for all those people who have been active in the WhatsApp and then sharing your experiences and then probably sharing some of the video clips that are helpful. So let us start today. So we are moving from, if you look at the first three modules looked at in terms of concepts, gender concepts, women's human rights and power in the context of social change. And then we moved from those in the last two modules, module 4 and 5, where we looked in terms of what tools and frameworks that we can use to understand the gender inequalities that exist in society. And then what strategies we can adopt to address those inequalities. So today we will be discussing in terms of how do we all translate all that into a programming. So the focus here is in terms of, we are not talking about a general programming, we are talking about a programming that is aimed at gender transformation. So how does a gender transformative programming must consider, what components it should consider? So I will start the screen and then can you see the screen?
Yes, Dawoodji.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Johar Ali. Okay. So what does that mean? What does gender transformative programming means? Is how do you integrate gender in all aspects of programming, right from the way you plan, you develop activities, implement it, and also you assess it. So how does this gender, does it remain as an independent component, or does it become a part of the program? Do you mainstream gender into the program? So what does it involve? There are few things that we need to look at in terms of when we talk about gender transformative programming, we are analyzing the human rights violations, the rights violation due to gender. as a result of the existing discrimination or inequality based on gender, how does it affect the violations of humanity? How does it affect realizing, claiming the human rights? So the focus first, we need to look at it is on the human rights, and its basis is in terms of the existing gender inequality and discrimination. So not only we look at in terms of how is the gender inequality and discrimination exists, it also looks at how to address them. So it's a twofold: one, analyzing the situation and addressing the situation. But how do we address is in a transformative manner. We are not looking in terms of tinkering it, making it changes here and there, little changes, but we are looking in terms of a transformation, a change, a radical change in the way the discrimination and inequality exists. So as a result, what we are looking at is whether it in terms of policies or programs and practices, it should contribute to improving the outcomes for women and girls, and there is equality. So we are aiming at gender equality. For us to achieve that gender equality, we are using a gender transformative as a programming. And certainly in terms of when we said we are looking in terms of the violations. So what we expect from a gender transformative programming is it's a human rights violation. So therefore, there are three key things that we need to keep in mind. A gender transformative programming looks at the human rights violations based on gender and addressing them in a transformative way so that the people enjoy their equality of rights. That's the core focus of a gender transformative programming. So let's look at what are the different processes that we will be dealing in a gender transformative programming. We are looking right from the beginning. This is the foundation is how do we analyze the poverty? How do we analyze the inequality? Is with a gender lens. The second one is what direction we set for our development program. How do we decide the gender sensitivity? What themes of action we will undertake? How do we assess, how do we track the progress that we have expected to make? Tracking the progress we will deal with as a module 8, but in this module we will be talking more in terms of the situation analysis, the direction for development program, the gender sensitivity, and themes for development action. So the first one is in terms of feminization of poverty. I heard people, some of you are aware or heard about feminization of poverty. Can you please share what is your understanding? Can someone share?
Hello, may I speak? It's Peggy.
Yeah, Peggy. Yes, Peggy.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Feminization of poverty, it relates to who is poor in the population. And most studies show that in most countries, it's the women and the girls who are poor. So that is why we say the feminization of poverty, because most poverty affects mostly women.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. I think this is the first one where it's seen in terms of across the globe. It's not only in some countries, across the globe, without any exception, the poverty and inequality are disproportionately high among women. So since the majority of women are affected by poverty and inequality, this term came into existence. But the principle remains the same. As Peggy was saying, the principle is, in terms of what it talks about, is that within the population, the impact, the effect of poverty and inequality are disproportionate. Disproportionate by gender, that is woman, and the other gender, which is in terms of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. But there is, so far, when people have not looked into the way how the other vulnerable, these are all vulnerable communities, vulnerable populations. So therefore, the basic understanding that we need to have is that poverty is spatial as intersectional. So therefore, inequality exists by the social categories that we have. So we need to keep that in mind. While certainly women forms the major portion of it, we must not ignore that there are other vulnerable populations who experience a similar situation in terms of poverty and inequality. So therefore, that's one, in terms of there is a disproportionately inequality and poverty. And then it also talks about, over the years, that there is an increasing inequality. And this is actually leading to empowerment. Empowerment is a higher form of your inability to live. So this is particularly seen in terms of, where do we see this? The increasing inequalities in terms of the type of livelihood they engage in, the earnings that they have. Because in previous sessions we have seen the quality of jobs that women can take, because it is always in terms of the poor quality jobs where there is insecurity is high and working conditions are poor and terms are unequal. So therefore, both in terms of the type of employment and the volume of wages that women enjoy, the difference is increasing. The third one, it talks about, though there is, we know in terms of human rights are not, are both women and men, because we are talking about equality of rights. And there are global instruments which reconfirmed women's rights have human rights. And then any violation is seen is not acceptable. But still there is a discrimination and inequality across the globe. It's in different forms, and new forms have come into play. So therefore, feminization of poverty talks about, though despite the positive steps that the national global instruments have taken, on the ground, the realities are different. This again is in terms of deepened by the globalization, where constantly there is a reduction in public spending on the services. So you find the new forms of inequality. And one of the things that you find is in terms of increasing number of households which are female headed or which is single woman. So these we need to look at in terms of, from these points of, in terms of disproportionate, in terms of the poverty and inequality. And the second one is that the discrimination and inequality continues to exist despite the efforts that are made in the last few decades. And we also need to be conscious that there are new forms of inequality. So what are the factors that contribute to that contributes to women to be at the risk of poverty and inequality? Certainly there are we need to look at 6 different elements while we understand the poverty. Is one certainly is in terms of, we are talking about that the poverty and inequality that women experience is both due to lack of income and the capabilities. So both in terms of the way they are engaged and the skills and competencies is, I'm not talking about in terms of how does it convert into livelihood, but any competency, even for them to assert their own rights and equalities. So it's both in terms from an economic and a social point of view. And there is a bias, continuous bias in terms of wages, in terms of, we have just looked in terms of the low paid jobs, access to land, credit, and also technology. So both in terms of the structures that exist and access to those structures is all biased, gender biased. Therefore, we find that there is a differential labor force participation. You still find in terms of there are more men in employment compared to women. And these people are subjected to not only in terms of less number of women are employed, but they experience both in terms of harassment and also equal opportunity. This is where we need to look at in terms of the what scope the equal opportunities provide. Because no, I don't think any state says that it is not, every state says it, the opportunities are open for all. But when you open the opportunities for all, what disadvantages the women have? So that we need to be conscious of. And we looked in terms of not only globalization, but whatever we have made, this is where we need to look at in terms of how did we approach women in development? How did we see in terms of the improvement in the lives of women in the past? We looked in terms more from these gender stereotypical approach to development. And so therefore you look at in terms of that all the women are employed or find jobs, are trained in jobs that are precarious in terms of working. Absence of autonomy, we have seen in terms of absence of autonomy in terms of decision making. So therefore, whether it is in private or in public places, so they only need to be listened to rather than they can take charge. So therefore, the loss of lack of autonomy contributes to that they are the most vulnerable population and they are exploited by everyone, both not only in terms of the household, but also at workplace. While all this we see at the community and the household level, but you also can look at it beyond that. The policies and structures also reflect the unequal power relations, because we need to recognize that the same hegemonic culture, the same patriarchal culture permeates at all spheres of life. So it's not only in terms of household, it gets in community, it gets into society, and even in the state, because the same section is getting into these type of spheres. So therefore, while we are saying that the basic foundation of gender mainstreaming is that we analyze poverty from a gender lens. And then we use gender feminization of poverty as a tool to analyze the poverty in terms of both income and their capabilities, what biases exist in the society, how are the men and women and other gender are participating in labor force, what is the effect of the people's lack of decision making, and then how are the structures and policies and institutions that are intensifying the gender inequality. So therefore, the first step is in terms of, for you to be clear, for your developed program to be focused, is in terms of what is our understanding of poverty and inequality on the ground. So therefore, if you want to be a gender transformative programming, which understands the inequalities and address the inequalities, then the suggestion is use a gender lens to understand the inequality so that you can address them appropriately. So moving from our own analysis of the situation with a gender analysis, we move to the what approach we will use. So I am going to present 3 different approaches. They are not exclusive, but they are mutually reinforcing approaches for a gender transformative programming. The first one is the human rights based approach. Because the first thing that we said when we talked about the gender transformative programming or integrating gender into program is that we analyze the inequality and poverty as a human rights violation based on gender. So therefore, the first is in terms of that our work is guided by the human rights. So it acknowledges that poverty is a denial of human rights. There are 2 things that I have been saying. Poverty and inequality are structural. There is the existing structures. So people who are now poor or unequal are not because they are born with that, but they are being subjected to this. So therefore, the human rights based approach acknowledges that poverty is due to the denial of human rights. So therefore, it looks in terms of addressing what are the causes that are contributing to that for this gender inequality and discrimination. So it looks in terms, that's why it looks that if we are involved in a development program, while we work for practical needs, what we need to look at in terms of how do we go beyond that, beyond the material resources, to addressing the capacity, the choices and power of people who are experiencing poverty and inequality. Because we have seen when we looked in terms of understanding power as part of social change, it's in terms of the structures, the institutions that reinforce, perpetuate the unequal gender roles, responsibilities, and relations. So therefore, if we are looking in terms of the development, then we need to look at in terms of how do you address these underlying factors. So we are looking in terms of basically on the 3 things. One is equality, principle of equality, the participation. That then if there is a matter that related to me, that I need to be participating in deciding what actions are required. And non-discrimination. So there is no discrimination, all are equal and everyone is entitled to equality of rights without any discrimination. So therefore it looks in terms of inclusion and accountability. That is where we are talking about holding state accountable. The state is obliged to ensure that all its citizens enjoy the equality of rights. So therefore, when human rights-based approach, when you are working, it demands accountability, and it also goes by in terms of what is legitimate to act. So the human rights-based approach is value-based, and it is principle-driven. So it works for change and looks for in terms of what freedom of choices that it can provide to women and other vulnerable gender. So these are first we need to look at in terms of human rights-based approach. What does it involve? It certainly involves, if we are using it, at two levels. One, people who are rights holders. So for them, empowering them, educating them to claim and assert their rights. On the other hand, the duty bearers. It's certainly state, but there are other institutional leads who are obliged to protect and fulfill. So therefore, it works on both sides, on people, on the rights holders, on the duty bearers. One in terms of claiming their rights, the other one ensuring that the rights are enjoyed by everyone. So it refers to how do you expand the freedom of choice for people and believing in their agency. Because we talked about agencies in terms of if I have a problem, that I take actions, and it believes in the capacity and the wisdom of people to take action. It seeks to address, as we have been saying, what are the underlying inequalities, distribution of power that contributes to marginalization. So when we are saying that it addresses the underlying inequalities and power, is actually challenging the existing gender rules and relations and transforming them. So basically it looks in terms of the human rights-based approach, rights of people, particularly those who are vulnerable, is at the core and looks at the gender of the states. So when we talk about human rights-based approach, it revolves around rights, and it talks about how do you enable the rights holder to claim the rights and encourage, sensitize, facilitate the duty bearers to ensure the equality of rights by all citizens. So far, let me stop at that, and before I get into the other approaches. Any questions, any clarifications? So,
how are you, Damu?
yeah, good, Veronica. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I would ask just a clarification on the right-based approach.
Right. To
gender transformative whatever.
Okay.
I would like to ask who is there's a duty bearer and there's a right holder.
Yeah.
So who is the right holder? Is it the women and the girls, or who is the right holder, or is it women, girls, boys, and others?
Yeah, all rights holders are everyone, but our focus certainly is in terms of, that's why when we talk about gender equality, we are talking about all genders, men, women, girls, boys, other gender, lesbians, gay, bisexual, transgender, everyone. So everyone are entitled to equality of rights. But what we are more concerned is, Veronica, within that context, who are more vulnerable? We know in terms of more vulnerable are the women, girls, other vulnerable population. It could be disabled, it could be other gender. So as a development practitioners, our main focus, our position will always be with women, girls, and other vulnerable people, their rights. But others, they have got their own capacities, their own economic position to assert their rights. But our concern is more on these people who are not able to take that charge.
Okay.
So therefore, the human rights based approach, we talk about the rights of those people who are the victims, who are the sufferers, who are experiencing poverty, who are experiencing inequality disproportionately.
Thank you very much. That is clear.
Yeah. Okay. So therefore, we have been, I think we have, is all contextual. I think we need to, when we talk about poverty and inequality, we need to, because the poverty and inequality are contextual. It differs from one context to another. In one context, maybe the women are more vulnerable. Maybe in another context, the men may be more vulnerable. So therefore, when we are working, we need to take into account the inequality and poverty that the population experiences in that particular context. It's a spatial, is in terms of, you find that more and more poverty and inequality exist in rural areas. And it is structural. That's in terms of causal factors, because we cannot ignore, we cannot be simplistic in understanding poverty and inequality, because it's all created, reproduced, and perpetuated by the structures that exist in the society, and within which state occupies a predominant position. In though they are obliged to ensure the rights, but they are also forefront in denying the rights, or being silent to the rights. Okay, can we move to the next one? Thanks, Veronica, for raising that. I appreciate. Let's move to the second approach. So the human rights based approach. The second one, I am going straight to gender and development, because in the Moodle content, you will find women and development and women in development. These are all the different phases of our own approach to development. So I'm not getting into those waves, because they are all past and history, now history. What is currently we are concerned is we have moved from those mistakes, those gaps, to look at development from a gender point of view. So what is gender and development talks about? It's the fundamental aspect of gender and development is it looks in terms of the socially constructed differences between women, men, and other gender, how those differences influence the social relationships and subordinates to women. I think these three things that we need to keep in mind. Very fundamentally, that there are social constructs which are, by construct themselves, they are differences. It's giving privileges to one and not those privileges to others. And how is those differences are contributing to the relationship that exists in the society, and in turn leads to subordination of women. So it focuses more on this, is in terms of, as I have been saying, in terms of, we know for sure that the women are more discriminated population. But as I have been saying, in gender inequality, we are not only concerned about women, but we are also concerned about other gender who suffer or similar discrimination and inequality. Therefore, the it looks in terms of relationships and social construction. The three things that should come into our mind, going back to the first module, where we said that building blocks of gender inequality is with roles, norms, which both of them determine the division of labor, gender division of labor, and the relations which decides the status, the relation between the men and women, which are perpetuated by the institutions with its power. So therefore, gender and development focuses on the existing gender inequality blocks and the power of institutions to transform them both at the institutions and larger society level, because they are creating, producing, reproducing the gender unequal relations in the society. So therefore, it looks in terms of how focusing on the gender roles, norms, and relations, and transforming the institutions that are integral, that have got intrinsic relationship in perpetuating these unequal gender rules, norms, and relations. The emphasis is gender and development. It does not undervalue the practical needs, but it gives emphasis on strategic gender needs, because the strategic gender needs, we recognize that they are actually challenging the gender roles, gender relations, and power relations within those things. So woman is not homogeneous. There is a diverse perspectives, diverse situations of women. So therefore, we are talking about that woman as a diverse group who can contribute. So what are the concerns gender and development have? His first concern is on the relations, the power relations, unequal power relations that exist between women, men, and other gender, and transforming them. So that's the core focus of gender and development. So it considers social construction of gender disparity. The second one is specific, is it looks in terms of the woman's work in both private and public spheres, and recognizes unpaid care work, because this is what we looked in the last budget, in the last session. How do we recognize, how do we value unpaid care work? Because we have seen the implications of unpaid care work, the disproportionate involvement of women in unpaid care work, disadvantaging them to less participation in livelihood, labor force participation, the type of jobs and the volume of earnings that they can have. So it gender not only looks in terms of the woman, but also look in terms of the gender roles of men. How does it affect? How does it impact the subordination? That's where I'm very happy about the two posts that you have given. One is on the speak out. I think that's where we need to look at. The other person was talking about, can men have a shoulder to share their roles? And I'm not making any judgment on that, but there is in terms of gender roles, norms, and relations, as much as women are experiencing or suffering with this, the men too experience in different ways the burden or the abuse of this. So therefore, gender and development looks at them in terms of looking at how do we address them. It emphasizes equal access of women and men to resources, benefits, and with no discrimination. And so therefore, its main argument is in terms of the state and the institutions which have got a responsibility to ensure And particularly in terms of the more and more in terms of globalization, we saw that there is a decline in terms of services for which all care services fall into this public services. So it looks in terms of the relationships and the institutions that it controls. So we are concerned in terms of our gender transformative program must be guided by human rights. We are talking about the centrality of human rights, and that centrality of human rights realizing it, we are using a gender development where we are talking about the unequal power relations that is socially constructed, that is keeping the woman and other gender to be unequal and discriminated. So the third approach that we need to look at is in terms of engaging men and boys in promoting gender equality. This is where I said we need to look at other waves of feminism or other waves of women and development to see is what increasingly we find that working exclusively with women is not going to contribute to gender equality. Because we have looked at men and women as more as a problem, but we should also see in terms of how do we convert that problem into solutions? How do we involve them so that they recognize and they deconstruct? So we looked in terms of the men and women, the gender roles, norms, and relations are all socialized behavior. So socialized in terms of what roles and norms and relations men and women must have. So therefore, how disproportionate is this in terms of decision making and control over? So how do we involve them, not only as a problem, to recognize how is socialization is contributing them to behave the way they behave in terms of control and in terms of resources and decisions. So it's an engagement with boys as allies, because we need to, I think we have been saying it in many occasions by many of you. We must look at them as allies, as people who can join us in solidarity to achieve gender equality. This is globally recognized. We are not talking about exclusive ourselves, but so it talks about how do we involve them to challenge the inequalities and have a positive impact. So they can deconstruct the gender roles and norms and relations, and then they can take responsibility for that. So what are the possible strategies that we can look at when we talk about engaging men and boys? Certainly one is in terms of group education, where we are talking about a critical reflection, deconstructing the gender norms, roles, taking responsibility for their actions and committing to make change in the way that they behave. This is a group education, is a transformation, is a conscientization of men and boys, so that if they know what they are doing it, our belief is that they would make a change in their behavior and practice. The second one is in terms of going beyond individuals into campaigning and mobilizing community, because we are talking about the norms and roles and relations which are not only limited to the household, but they are perpetuated by the community and the society at large. So therefore, we are talking about intervening at the community level to bring change in these norms that influence inequality. So the third one is in terms of health and social services. We find that there is some of the things that comes is in terms of the power dynamics in gender relations, where it is accepted that men can have multiple partners. This is what we are challenging it. So as a result of it, there are issues in terms of health, which need to be responded to. But I think within the structure, within the rules that exist, that they feel ashamed to have access to this. So therefore, how the health and social services become responsive to the needs of men, women, and other gender. That's where we, particularly in terms of the sexual and reproductive health. So what we are concerned when we are involving in any of these is there are 4 things that must be our constant reference. One, we are looking at whatever strategy, and these are 3 different ones, but you can use around that. There are different people maybe using different ways of reaching out to men and boys to make a change in the gender relations. So while doing it, we must ensure that they don't negatively reinforce the masculine stereotypes. What we are emphasizing is cooperation and respect rather than domination. So encourage encourage men and boys to facilitate equality of opportunities. We find in terms of equal opportunities, all aspects. It could be education, it could be occupation, it could be health, it could be political participation, all spheres of life. We find that the women have been discriminated and excluded. So therefore, we need to, when we are saying engaging men and boys, we also need to look at how do they identify and proactively encourage men to access those opportunities. And in particular, we are talking about violence, and we see in terms of violence as a reflection of masculinity and power relationships. And so therefore, and we have seen, because we have recently come across, done a research on the women and girls exerting or assessing their rights. And one of the major issue is the violence from husband for various reasons. So therefore, how do we foster the role of men and women to ending violence? Using their own sphere of influence, not only in terms of their own household or neighborhood, but beyond that. So the focus that we are talking about is that the men and boys must move their strength in terms of respecting and treating women and other gender equal, rather than using force and dominance. So these are 3 approaches that we suggest in a gender transformative program. If you have analyzed your situation based on using gender analysis, how in terms of translating that analysis into action, you use human rights approach with a gender and development component and engaging men and boys, so that you can bring the gender transformative programming, gender transformation in the society. Any questions so far? I think there are some people. Muthoni? Yes, Muthoni.
Not a question. How are you, Prof?
Good. About
great.
Yeah.
Not a question, but just to give an example of something that worked. There's a community in my country, Kenya, that is very prevalent for female genital mutilation, FGM. And I remember attending one of the community engagement activities, and it was more on educating the community. And so this time we worked with the men and boys just to educate them and help them understand the effects that FGM has on the girls. And it was very interesting that most of them had no idea like what really happens, the process of FGM and how it affects the girls. And looking back, like after going for monitoring after a couple of months, in that particular village, the number of cases had reduced. And it was because the men and the boys, now the brothers to these girls were involved, and now they were actually standing up for their sisters and cousins and other relatives. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Muthoni. I think that's exactly what we are expecting, because I think if, another video that you have shared, I mean, who is the perpetrator? It is the brother who is the perpetrator, because they're all influenced or socialized by people around, because no brother will like to harm the sister. But in that case, what happened? Because people around influence the people, because it's seen something which is abnormal, violation of the rule. People need to look at it as not violation of the rule, of the norm, but it is violation of the rights of people. I think, as you rightly said, if we can involve them, explain to them, help them to deconstruct all these practices, certainly they would bring a positive impact. Martha, you raised your hand, and then.
Thank you, Prof. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good morning here.
Oh, okay.
No issue.
It's just a thought that came into my mind when we talk about engaging men and boys. Men and boys, men nowadays, they feel that they have no access to opportunities anymore. When it comes to, let me say, when it comes to employment or in the economy, because women are many by nature, and they have been left behind. So they are getting opportunities, but it makes men to feel not relevant anymore or not valued anymore. So I don't know whether that is also an issue that should be discussed when in engaging men and boys. To say that when people are affirming, for example, women, it's not the intention that it's to their is to disadvantage men.
That's a very, very right point, Martha. I think see that's where I think the methodology of communication, how are you communicating? See, if you bank more on the problem, then the solution will not come. So you need to go for solution, because we all know what the problem is. So here also, I think what is important is it's natural for, as I said, people who have been experiencing or enjoying a particular privilege. If someone else comes, then there will be people will feel threatened, they feel competition, but it is not a competition. I think we need to educate, saying that opportunity exists for both. So one cannot take away from others. That's what we need to look at in terms when women are claiming the rights. It is not that they are at the cost of men, because both are can access the opportunities. So far, it's being predominantly or dominated by men. We are saying that there must be a facilitation. The men also should recognize that wherever those, like for example, let's look at in terms of beyond the employment, in terms of education, health, resources. Should only I decide, or should I also give opportunity for women to decide? Should I say that women can decide within the house, but not other things? So these are the constructs that what we are looking for. That if you can bring through a process of realization, and then that's where I think one of the powerful tool. Because we have seen that a person is actually talking about to a group of 3 children, but one is in terms of act like a man or act like a woman. Because you need to, this is where one thing which my friend told me long time ago still vibrates in me. He comes, I think, I am from India, so this person is a Dalit. So when we were talking about issues of Dalit, so he was talking about in terms of we are intellectualizing the issue because you are not part of the discrimination that we experienced. You're all other caste. We may talk about them, but we don't really know what the problem is. I think one of the group members was saying in terms of you need to be a woman to know what the issues of women are. So therefore, when we are bringing this education among men and boys, you need to enable them to go through that process and see in terms of how you feel like being a woman. Thank you, Martha. I think all those things need to come in terms of how do people look at positively. That's where I think is important for all of us to recognize that they don't see it as a threatening one. They need to look at that we would like all of us to go together in challenging the existing harmful practices that exist. Aiswini, please.
Hello, thank you so much for such a wonderful session today. And I have been hearing some of my course mates give out some really really wonderful examples. And keeping those in mind, I wanted to talk about a very, very specific example. These are called as virginity initiations, and I'll just like to talk about them in context of Malawi. So I remember doing an assignment on this in one of my master's courses. And so basically in this, and I'm sure many people must have heard of this as well, but I just like to just go into it briefly, that basically this practice is seen as a passage into womanhood, where the tradition is to train the girls into good wives. And usually the target population for this is girls aged between 19 to 17 years of 17-year-old. And they are basically taken to a camp which are called as a women only space. And the idea, like they train women to be good wives, like they encourage unprotected sex. Women are seen as breeding machines, and this is also a place where we can see an increase in the spread of HIV. And they also talk about how menstruation, which is a very normal and a natural body process, they talk about it as a taboo, which turns off men sexually. Now, the interesting part to realize here is that women, elderly women in the community, are the ones to train the younger women. And they are they perpetuate the concept of sexual cleansing in these cases. And the perpetrators, the men who sleep with these girls, are known as hyenas. And so the idea is that here it's a community tradition that is there, and they talk about how the choice is taken away from a young girl. She is not allowed to make decisions for her, take decisions for her. And even in the age where she's supposed to enjoy her childhood, enjoy basic rights of being a young girl in her parents' house, she is forced to go through this virginity initiation or sexual cleansing, and when in an age when she's supposed to be studying. So now my idea is that we're talking about how governments and other government agencies should come up with initiatives and implement transparency where they involve the local population so that we can make up better policies that safeguard the interests of young children, specifically young girls. My what I want to say is that there are times when it is difficult to explain things to the hardliners of the society, because these are practices that are deeply entrenched into the culture of that place, and to break free from that is very, very difficult, especially the senior members of the tribe, explaining them how this is wrong on so many levels, especially when you look at it as rape, child exploitation, harassment, mental trauma. They will only see it as a practice that has been going on for generation and will only elaborate on its heritage value. So my question is, how do you explain how wrong this is to village elders or a community that is so deeply involved in this practice that they don't see it as wrong, they see it as a situation or a milestone that a young girl must go through in order to become a good wife, and that is the only way that she will be successful in her job as a good wife, as a good homemaker, and a good mother eventually. And the surprising fact is that their mothers, who have also gone through this same trauma, are absolutely fine with it. And even if they do have a problem going against the village elders, specifically the women, the village women, elderly village women, is very difficult for them, because they're going against the conventional narrative, which requires them to adhere to it and not break free from that narrative. So my question is, how do you navigate then? How do you interact with the village elders as an agency and tell them what they're doing is wrong, and this is a practice that is exploitative of the young girl's mental well-being, physical well-being? So my question is I'd be really grateful if you could maybe understand how would one, in a gender sensitive and a gender survivor kind of an approach, how would you navigate around this?
Thank you, Ashwini. You raised a very important point. Also, I will use the example that you have given to emphasize the other point, subsequent point that I will make in terms of choices of the gender perspective. But responding to what you said, Ashwini, I think we need to look at the problem is in terms of people around, they find they are the custodians of culture. And so therefore they attach a lot of honor. So therefore anything that is abnormal or anything which is a deviation is seen, is not helpful for them, not only for the family, for the whole community. So therefore there is more appealing thing that one would make. So certainly I agree, it is not easy to break this, because we all would like to play, would like to have a safe play rather than play which is more challenging. But however, I would see is in terms of how do we do that? See, one of the things that I have seen, it may, you take it if it is relevant, is in terms of, see, if we talk about some others issue, then we get more, it appeals us more. I mean, if we talk about my own family, I may not, but if I point out these issues of the other family, then I react to those things. That's where I think some of the videos that we used would help, because always I think what we need to look at, I think what Mary and Martha, they have been doing in terms of training some, the leaders, community leaders would certainly make a difference, because they can either act positively or negatively. So far they have been acting negatively from a gender equality point of view. Can we convert that negative energies into positive energies? can you involve them and then put them as the torch bearers? Because that makes a difference. Because if you put them as exclude them and then treat them as separate, then it will not help. If you involve them, include them into your own thing, and then see whether they can. So I'm sure that not all leaders will be converted, but certainly there will be one or two who would convert, and this goes on. I think we have been say we need to make a change, bits and pieces. We cannot think, because it's a Herculean task. Issue is generational. So it's not easy to bring that change in this generation. But certainly we need to make an effort to see whether there are pockets of change that we can create. And then if there are pockets of change, either individuals or in terms of villages or population, that message will spread as we go along. That's where I think we need to come up with more innovative ways. How do we constructively enable people to see the problem? Because if you can put blame, if you use a blame game, it's not going to take us anywhere. But if you can, if your communication, if you can, your methodology helps in terms of how does it actually contribute? How does this harm your own sisters and daughters in the future? When that will make a difference, at least in a few people, and then it would spread. I think, see, the problem is in terms of when it gets ignited and then grows little bit. But once when it becomes when its presence is seen, then it catches fire. Ashwini, it's not philosophical. I just thought I will share my perspective.
No, I really appreciate that, Damo. It really makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm so grateful that you gave your side of things, because it does make a lot of other questions that I had in mind fall into place. So thank you so much for clarifying that for me.
Thank you, Ashwini. Jessica, Peggy, and Nancy.
Okay. Good afternoon, Prof.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's just a comment and a concern that in Kenya, we made a lot of strides in promoting gender equality through engaging boys and men in promoting this through the various strategies that you have already mentioned, for instance, group education, community mobilization, health and social services. And this, I say, we've made a lot of, we've gone miles. However, in recent months or in recent years, there are some practices, or rather, there are some stakeholders in the country, for instance, the politicians, the elders, and some religious leaders, including even the academia in Mount Kenya region, that I believe are clawing back the gains that we have achieved over the decades, in the sense that they are convincing the population to go back to their roots. That is using the retrogressive traditions, and they are having so many campaigns and mobilizing people to go back to their traditions. For instance, those people and of course, Christianity was part and parcel of colonialism, and we know that Christianity brought light. Christianity, of course, meant us to move away from the retrogressive traditions, but these religious leaders now and the other custodians of culture are mobilizing people to go back to their roots, because they believe that what Christianity has done has reversed the norms that were there, and that's why many things have changed. It is a concern, and I would like to hear the Kenyans make their comment.
Thank you, Jessica. Peggy?
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I just wanted to share on the Botswana experience on engagement of men and boys in fighting gender-based violence. My experience in Botswana has been that whenever a woman has been violated, and especially a child, when a child has been violated, the response from the law enforcement, Botswana police especially, which is run mainly by men, and those who are at the station commander, assistant commander, all those, they are men. And their response would be, where was the mother? The mothers must look after their children. They must know where their children are at all times. And it's shifting the problem from the perpetrator to the victim, saying, what could the victim have done not to have been violated? Which I find that this is something that has been normalized, that men are expected to violate women and children, and that the women have to look after themselves. So this is a structural anomaly that needs to be addressed, that even those in positions of power where they need to be protecting the women and girls, they're also asking other women to look after these women so that they don't get violated. So it's something that we need to be looking at.
Very right,
And
Peggy.
finally,
I think, I think
finally,
sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, finally, to Ashwin, you can go back to module 3, where we were talking about understanding power for social change. When we engage with our communities, we should not go and tell them. We should rather be educating them about human rights, and then they will be able to identify those violations themselves, instead of us as activists of human rights practitioners coming to tell the communities that their norms are wrong. We have to educate them first on what human rights is all about, and then they start looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, what are we doing to ourselves, to our children, to our women, to our men, to our boys? Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Nancy?
Thank you. Allow me to continue from where Peggy stopped.
Okay.
For Kenyan context, and I'll speak of an experience I had in one of the counties, that is Elgeyo Marakwet. In this county, especially the chaos side, it was very difficult to end female genital mutilation. But our campaign was, it took us very long to achieve results, like termination or end of FGM among the Elgeyo community, because we used the scholars who are doing research on FGM, pass the information or findings they got to the public, and also spend a lot of time with the custodians of culture, that is the Council of Elders, gave them the findings, and lobbied for the end of FGM in the community. And we started a very serious campaign where we now brought in men and boys in the campaign. And we achieved a lot of results because government had also started bringing an end to the practice, by all means, even prior to the law. So we have achieved a lot in that country, in that county, and it will be very difficult to have the pressure coming in from people, I mean, especially the Department of Culture, which is pushing people to do their cultural practices. It is very difficult for FGM to be one of the things to be encouraged or to be pushed by the cultural department, because the law is already in existence that addresses that. So for the other communities, because I also got an experience to work in the Nyanza region, especially the Kuria, the Kisii, it is very difficult to end because the community have not found an alternative for that. So the alternative rite of passage is not working for them because they subject their girls quite early enough. And it is difficult for also men to marry women who have not gone through the practice. So it is successful in other communities and not successful in others. But the use of religion, educationists, reform is from within. It is not from outside. You cannot bring change from let's say somebody from another county bringing change into a new country. No, it has to be intrinsic change. Yeah, and that's what we have achieved. I wanted to share that with experience.
Thank you, Nancy. I think you brought in the other one is in terms, it need to be in situ because it need to be within. The change must come from within. The first realization and then taking responsibility and acting. All those three things must come from within. Certainly. Let's move on in terms of moving from those approaches. This is very important one. We may spend little time in terms of discussion, but I think in terms of deciding your gender sensitivity in the program, we need to look at gender sensitivity as a respect for another without prejudice to the gender. Recognize women's and other gender differential needs. So gender sensitivity is not it's not one single block. It's a continuum. You need to see where our existing program is located on this, and then see how do you move from one stage or process to another process on the continuum. So gender sensitivity is can be placed on from extreme gender negative to gender transformative. Each of them signifies a particular approach to dealing with gender integration. So gender negative, gender blind, gender aware, gender sensitive, gender responsive, and gender transformative. Let me take in terms of gents now what Aiswini was talking about, this education on virginity, where it's more a training girls to be how to be good wives, is a good, perfect example of gender negativity. Because gender negativity is actually perpetuating the inequality or reproducing the existing norms, rules. And if we are talking about how girls need to be good wives, because we are always actually going in terms of reinforcing the existing ones. So therefore, in terms of the gender negative programming, ignores the equality of men and women. It only favors one gender over the other gender. So while gender blind is, there is a slight difference between gender negative and blind. Gender negative is, you know there are inequalities, but you contribute to that. Whereas gender blind is you're not aware of those things. You don't aware in terms of what power roles, power relations are there, what roles exist in terms of equality rights, treating everyone same, which often reinforces. See, this is one example. What I have been saying is in terms of gender equality and gender equity. We may talk about that, particularly I'm talking about recruitment. You may say that we are open to everyone, and there are equal opportunities for all people to apply. But without looking in terms of the differential level playing field, equal opportunities serve no purpose. Because we don't factor in what are the disadvantages that the women have to compete with the position that is advertised for. They may have competence, they may have equal skills, but their situation may be different, so that for them to access those opportunities. So the gender blind is in terms of not knowing the interplay of these power relations and roles that may affect the gender equality. Certainly these two are not acceptable in any program, whether it is gender negative or gender blind, are not acceptable. Gender negative certainly is condemnable, whereas gender blind, you can see how you can educate them to be aware of this. The third one is a gender aware, where you see that there are roles and responsibilities, power relations between women and men, but you work around those differences, but do not address what are the underlying factors that perpetuate. The only difference in terms of where are the roles, norms that are there, but you don't attempt to change them, but you said, how do I overcome that so that my program will not get affected? Whereas gender sensitive is, you acknowledge that there are differences and inequality between women and men, and you consider the unequal gender norms, roles and relations, but you do not address. So like I said, there is a distinction between the gender negative and gender blind. The difference between gender sensitive and gender responsive is, gender sensitive is you become sensitive to that. Sensitive to there are needs that women have and other gender have, and there are unequal gender relation. Norms are there, roles are there. But you do not address those norms, those roles that contribute to inequality. Whereas gender responsive, you act on them, you articulate initiative to address the gender differences. So sensitive is only one part of it, but do you go beyond in terms of addressing this? So rather than recognizing and overcoming that, can you head on counteract the things that exist? Whereas the higher form is the gender transformative, which is actually addressing the underlying causes of inequality and transforming those gender roles, gender norms and relations to see that there is power relations are progressive in women and men, and challenges the discriminatory policy. Because we said one is policies, it's a good in terms of there are policies, but we need to also look at in terms of how those policies are they gender responsive? Do they contribute to decreasing the inequality or increasing it? So what are the discriminatory procedures and practices that exist? So therefore, it's a continuum from gender negative to gender transformative, where as a program, gender transformative program, what is not acceptable is gender negativity and gender blindness. You cannot be contributing to or reinforcing the gender inequality. And you cannot say that you are not aware of the differential needs and power relations that exist in the society. You need to become aware, you need to move to be sensitive, responsive, and transformative. So you can be on any of these, but the commitment is, you move from one stage to another stage, where we are talking about that the inequalities and discrimination exists because of the unequal power relations that are contained in those three in terms of unequal gender roles, gender norms, which define the division of labor, and unequal power relations that decides the status between women and men. So moving from deciding which, we will spend more time on this on Thursday, because we are one of the person will come and then share, and then probably we can spend more time to identify this gender sensitivity. Moving based on this analysis, approaches, and then gender sensitivity, what type of development actions you can do? There are four fundamental perspectives that one look at is, since the gender inequality and discrimination is such complex and diverse, you need to have a multi-track strategy to attain a sustained social change. And these changes must be real for women and communities in everyday life. Integrating gender perspective on both as reinforcing as well as political processes. So we are talking about challenging power relations. And there should be no ambiguity in terms of expanding the freedom of women, men, and other gender. Keeping this, what are we looking in terms of? We are looking in terms of transforming the gender norms and unequal power relations by engaging women, men, community leaders, government, and civil society. There are two things that we should focus, target. One is the socialization of individuals, one to learn and to conform to those norms and ensure that it is reproduced in other generations. The second one is institutionalization. The structures, the institutions that are responsible to perpetuate this. So we are looking in terms of gender bias in all aspects of life. So where do we focus on? Given this, we saw the manifestation of gender inequality in terms of economic opportunities, educational attainment, health, and political participation. Therefore, the probable thing that we are suggesting, how do we empower women? How do we transform education for them? How do we enhance livelihood? And how do we influence public policies? These are the type of actions that we can think of. The details is according to our context. Catalina, I agree with you. I think you have made a good point in terms of the relation to other gender, and then Vera talking about new forms of inequality. Okay, let me stop at that, and then let's get comments, questions, clarifications. Cynthia, you were able to join us.
Hello, everyone. Yeah. How are you? Mine, it's a bit, I'm confused about something.
Okay.
And I do not mean to judge anybody, put anybody down, but I'm expressing an opinion based on what I know.
Okay. This
issue about gender definitions, male, female, and we hear about other genders like transgender, lesbian, gay. I'm so confused because a transgender is one who moves from one gender to the other. So I don't think it should be qualified as gender. A lesbian, from my own understanding, are two females in a sexual relationship. It does not remove their femininity. Or the homosexual, two men who are in a sexual relationship, they will still remain male. So sometimes when these issues arise and you talk about the rights, I would rather look at it from the point of the basic human rights. This individual is a human being first, should not be discriminated against because of anything, whether choice of sexual orientation, whether the choice of life, so long as what he or she does is not a criminal offense under a law. Like if a lesbian kills a human being, if the punishment for killing is A, there shouldn't be any discrimination because the person is this. That is what I stand for. Do not discriminate against anybody because of whatever reason. But to categorize a transgender as when you're classifying gender, or a lesbian when you're classifying gender, honestly, for me, the world might decide to bring you terminologies and languages to what we do. like I said earlier, when I'm not judging anybody, I think also we could help ourselves in saying, no, yes, this exists, but it is not the norm. It's like saying a single parent is a family. What happened to the traditional family? These are the thoughts that have been going on in my mind when we're doing this, because sometimes some of this discrimination actually stem from these things that we are introducing into our society. Then my last contribution is when Peggy shared about the experience of Botswana. It's very real. For the fact that most of these positions are occupied there, that is the tendency. Meanwhile, in the law, the onus of proof lies on the abuser, especially in the case of maybe violation of a child. The onus of age is the one, not the child. But a society has become a little bit complacent in pushing the blame back to the woman. And unfortunately too, as we struggle for women empowerment, sometimes the women are actually those who make it very difficult for you to empower. And like I always say, eventually, engagement, dialogue is a better weapon than maybe attack. I think it was, I've forgotten who said something about engaging and giving information. Sometimes people are not even aware. Let me end this by giving an example of not being aware of something and even being part of an action that you don't even know why you're acting. I was in our convent one day and we saw a mob beating somebody very close to our gate. We made a call on the hotline. The officer who received our call was more interested in knowing our nationality because, of course, the donation betrayed that we are not locals. And I told him, I said, you are interested in my nationality and maybe because I'm a woman and you will not do what you're supposed to do. I've only reported a citizen's, a citizen observing something illegal. While we're talking, a young man from nowhere carried a very big stone. And that young boy they were beating would have died that day, but for the intervention of somebody. When the crowd dispersed, I had identified that young man, and he was somebody who lived in the neighborhood. Later I called him, I said, you would have killed the person today. What did he do? He said, I don't know, sister. I said, you did not know. You saw a mob doing something. You had no idea of what it was, and you were going to be part of a murder, a lynching. That is what we do sometimes. So engagement, empowerment, dialogue, sometimes lobbying are ways we can, but we should need to put our brothers and sisters, especially our brothers, sometimes are the ones who will protect, who will stand up for their sisters. That's my contribution for today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that. I think you have raised very provocative things for people to deliberate on. I certainly agree in terms of the human rights are not determined by gender. Certainly the basic thing, we are talking about human beings, whether they are male, female, or other gender. Certainly I agree. But when we are talking about as a programming, I think we need to also recognize that where do we target? Where do we invest our energies more? That's where among the human beings, who are the most vulnerable? Where do we stand for them, with them, along with them? I think that's what I would like you to look at. I certainly value what you said. At the principal level, I think we must not be determined by which gender identity, but I would still emphasize that in our own target, our own focus, because we can't reach out to everyone. Can we reach out to the most vulnerable and who happen to be women, girls, and others? Aishwini?
Damo, I have a very small contribution to make.
Sure.
I've been hearing a lot of other speakers raise some really valid points, and I've just something that came to me in context of, I will use the example of India here.
Okay.
And particularly, I will use sexual assault and rape. Okay. So when a woman is raped, oftentimes the questioning, and if she decides to report the crime, oftentimes when they go to a police station to report the crime that has taken place after taking all the, going through medical tests and everything else, I feel the way the questioning is done by the police officers is very, very traumatizing, and I feel it can be doubly exploitative to them with their mental health, because in the insensitive way they will go through the trauma and narrate their side of things. Now the thing is that and oftentimes there is also this thing of victim blaming, where we say that you must have done something wrong. Why were you wearing a short dress? Why were you going at a late hour? My question is, why does that anything have connected to me getting sexually assaulted? I could be wearing anything. I could be dressing in any manner. I could be going at any point of time in the day, and I could still get, sexually assaulted. But why specifically would you blame and say that, why did you go out at night? Like, why would you put the blame on me, that as if I brought it on me? So I feel like we need to break free from this narrative where we stop blaming the victim and the survivor here, because they are not at fault in any which way. And people who are complicit to that, I think we need safe spaces to create conversation and dialogue and educate them. And I think it is high time that we hold men accountable, and sorry, not just men, but perpetrators in general accountable for their actions, because it is time that we start educating ourselves, spread awareness, and create a safe space where, in a very respectful manner, we can have conversations with them where we're not trying to blame anybody for their way of thinking, but to question and, have a transparent discussion about what's right and what's wrong, and also use that forum to talk about the human rights violation that a person is committing or unknowingly be committing. So I feel like the onus, when it is said that a woman is responsible for getting raped or sexually assaulted because they were wearing a certain dress, they were going out at a certain point in time, makes no sense to me. And I don't know, I have seen news reports where cases have reported that a woman wearing a burqa was also sexually assaulted, and a woman wearing a short outfit was also sexually assaulted. So I don't think it's the dressing of the victim or the survivor here that is the problem, but it is the thinking and this thinking of the perpetrator that is a problem, that they think they can assault another person, and then the society questioning and victim blaming them and exploiting them further and harassing them further with this trauma. So this is what I wanted to add here. Thank you.
Thanks, Aishwini, because that's, I think we have to look at in terms of, these are mechanisms of silencing the protests, silencing the change. What are the two ways that people use? One mechanism is violence, because you show violence, you make so that people get frightened to talk about it. The other one is in terms of use culture and then say that this is an abnormality. Unfortunately, we need to look at in terms of culture and the religious institution. Unfortunately, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about religious institutions. Religion by nature treats everyone equal, but the institutions may not treat them equal. The interpretation of religion may not treat them equal. That's where the culture comes in. So you use that as an excuse to blame the victim rather than support the victim. That's where we need to look at the human rights-based approach is victim biased, because you look at in terms of that you support the victim, you look at the victims from their point of view rather than from the perpetrator. But the culture looks at from the perpetrator's point of view, because the culture is a hegemonic and they perpetuate the hegemonic culture. So therefore they look at, because they consider violence, they condone violence, they accept violence. So therefore they use this to, so therefore I think what we need to look at is how do we bring this change? I think Aishwini, you have been saying it loud and clear. I think we need to look at how do we break this? Is there a way? Certainly there is, in terms of how long you can continue. I think people, I think I have seen that we were one time, I was facilitating a group to look at in terms of how do we measure social change. And we were talking about the land entitlement. Persons who have been cultivating it for ages never claimed their title, but once they claimed. I said, how did, because you have been doing it the same thing, how did it suddenly made you to challenge this? They said, we don't know, because having experience, sometimes you want to oppose it, you want to protest it. So therefore, I think the culture is also, see, culture, we need to understand, is not static. What we have today is, over the years we have built this. We can change it. We can bring change in that, and that change becomes normal tomorrow. And that we don't recognize. We stick to this culture rather than open to change the culture. I think the comments which you said that are used to, how do I silence people who raise the issue in public economy, because you will have more people who will be supporting these custodians rather than the victims. But I think more and more we need to see, where do we stand? What's our position? I think each one of us who are concerned with rights, human rights, who are concerned with gender equality, we need to see how do we stand with people who are experiencing rights violation, and then see whatever sphere of space that we can influence it, so that the change organically grows. Any more? And then I think one more intervention we may have to close with. We are going beyond time. Any more quick comments? Thank you, Ashwin, for those wonderful things. Thank you very much for everyone who have participated. It was a very lively discussion we had. So see you on Wednesday. We'll be talking on Wednesday about we talked about engaging men and boys, and we will look at it in terms of, on Thursday, the gender sensitivity. See you on Wednesday at the same time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I will try.
Bye.
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 Bye.